Strokes, also called a CVA, is what happens when the brain lacks oxygen, typically due to a clot in a blood vessel, which cuts off oxygen supply to the brain. So, just like any organ without oxygen, the brain begins to die. But strokes can also be caused by narrowed blood vessel, which decreases oxygen delivery to the brain, like in atherosclerosis, or even sudden rupture of a vessel in the brain, known as an aneurysm. Either way, the brain lacks oxygen and tissues die. Now for the type of strokes, we have TIA, known as a transient ischemic attack, which I remember TIA as a tiny stroke, since we have a tiny lack of oxygen. Now, breaking down the medical terminology, transient means lasting only a short time, ischemic means a lack of oxygen, and attack means it happens suddenly. But TIAs come and go and often resolve by themselves. Now, the other types of strokes are more permanent. So a CVA, a cerebral vascular accident, just think CVAs are more serious. We have no oxygen, which means long-term permanent damage. Now, there are two types of CVAs. Ischemic, meaning that low oxygen, typically from a blood clot that cuts off oxygen supply, also called embolic or thrombotic stroke, and a hemorrhagic stroke, like an aneurysm, so bleeding from a ruptured blood vessel, resulting in high risk for increased ICP. Now, the number one risk factor and cause to know for the NCLEX and nursing exams, write this down, is hypertension, over 140 systolic. This one was stressed as the single most important risk factor to prevent a stroke. So the key term for prevention was to instruct the patient to take their antihypertensive medications regularly, since the stroke risk can be decreased by up to 50% when hypertension is controlled. So Hesse mentions the highest risk for a stroke was that hypertension, over 140 systolic. And Kaplan says that hypertension was the highest risk factor for a CVA. Well, why though? Well, think of the patho here. Uncontrolled hypertension pounds those little blood vessels inside the brain, stretching them out and making them very fragile. Now, a tricky NCLEX question for a client recovering from a stroke with hypertension over 200 systolic, the intervention was to keep the systolic blood pressure over 170 for the first 24 to 48 hours. This makes sure we lower the pressure slowly, sort of like landing a plane. We land it slow and smooth, no big drops. This prevents us from crashing into hypotension. So remember, we need to land that plane slow and steady.
Thanks for watching.